Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood is a beloved anime. It's even the #1 ranked anime on Mal, so naturally I said fuck that shit and decided to read the Fullmetal Alchemist manga to properly see what all the fuss was about. Currently I'm a little over halfway done. I've read up to chapter 74 of the manga, to be precise. And I thought for this month's Patreon bonus video, since we've now covered Attack on Titan, Berserk, and Vinland Saga, let's move on to something new. So here we are with some first impressions of the first 70 chapters of Fullmetal Alchemist. I've described the Fullmetal Alchemist characters so far on my Twitch streams as a group of entirely A-tier characters in terms of tier lists. A-tier, not S-tier, for better and for worse. This is largely how I feel about the series overall. I think it's a solid A-tier series. Everything works well, all the characters have nice arcs that wrap up neatly, the art looks great, the character designs are memorable, the plot and mystery surrounding the world are interesting, the plot twists are great, particularly the whole father is not our father thing, but it's missing that special something to fully put it over the edge for me, to make it a staple on my favorites list. It seems to be missing that special spice or that connection with me that things like Berserk and Attack on Titan have, but it still has time. So overall that's my opinion, but let's get into some of the grittier details and the things I have to say about them. Let's start with our main boys, Edwin and Alphonse Elric. I like them. I usually don't like the main character, and I usually don't like main characters the most in a cast. And while Alphonse probably isn't one of my favorite characters, Edward is definitely up there. Edward is a shonen protagonist, meaning he has the same virtues as most other shonen protagonists. But the way this thematically similar package is delivered is where the characterization shines the brightest. I think he works more for me than most other protagonists in this genre, if that's what you want to call it. Fullmetal Alchemist is inherently different than most shonen series, firstly because it isn't a Shonen Jump weekly series. From what I understand, the chapters came out monthly, meaning that there's more content and it's better drawn each time. But also means that it escapes the trappings of the weekly Shonen Jump formula. Every Shonen Jump manga is, by order of the magazine it's featured in, similar, because the magazine has certain criteria for the stories it publishes. It's a brand. To put this in a different context, Fullmetal Alchemist is more of an Attack on Titan-like shonen than a Naruto-like shonen, for the better. It is allowed to explore certain aspects of the narrative in more grown-up and mature ways, more like something you'd see in Attack on Titan, that is technically published in a shonen magazine, rather than a weekly Shonen Jump series like Naruto, which has to be on-brand constantly for Shonen Jump. So, I think these circumstances led to why Edward is a better shonen protagonist than most I've seen, since the circumstances around his creation are quite unique. Another unique circumstance around Edward's creation that makes him more unique is that Fullmetal Alchemist, unbeknownst to me until I looked into it, was written by a woman, Hiromu or Hiromi Arakawa. I think it's interesting that this isn't something more progressive anime fans brag about. The fact that the consensus best anime ever was written by a woman, but her experience as a woman definitely has influence over her work and over the characterization of Ed. This is also probably the reason why Fullmetal Alchemist is better than most series with its portrayal of women characters, especially in a shonen action series. So Edward is the prototypical coming-of-age shonen hero character archetype from a woman's perspective, which makes him inherently different and interesting. And one of these unique elements surrounding his creation must be what pulls him away from the rather boring norm of shonen protagonists, because I usually don't like them, but I like him. And on the surface, he's mostly the same as these other protagonists. He's hot-headed, which leads well into comedy, which is inherent in most shonen. But again, this series seems to be stronger than most with its comedy as well. The constant short gags somehow never seem to get old. But he also has a rough exterior, a tragic backstory, and when the pressure is on and the stakes are high, he's shown to have a golden heart. These are all the elements of a normal protagonist, but there's something in the details that differentiates him that I can't quite put my finger on, and I'll see if I can identify his secret as I finish up the rest of the series. Alphonse I don't really have much to say about. The conceit of his character and his character design are both great, and I'm not annoyed when he's on screen, but he's not necessarily one of my favorites. But in talking about the boys here, I think it's time we start to talk about Winry, and then sidestep into the general topic of female representation in Fullmetal Alchemist. I saw someone in one of my Twitch streams call Winry annoying, and I couldn't possibly further disagree. Winry is one of the first indicators I had that Fullmetal Alchemist knew what it was doing. Shonen has a problem with women, this is not alarming. They also have a problem with relationship writing, but we'll get into that later. But Shonen has a notorious problem with women, And while Fullmetal Alchemist doesn't always succeed with its female characters, Winry is one of the best main love interests for a shonen protagonist I've ever seen. Winry exists and has a purpose in the Fullmetal Alchemist world outside of Edwin, which should be the baseline, but I'm happy it's true here. She has a passion that isn't shared by our main characters for automail, which is also useful to the protagonist's journey. She's likable and fulfills the generic childhood sweetheart motif that's nice to see play out even if we've seen it a million times before. This is also refreshing to see in a shonen, and I really appreciate her in the narrative, and would never call her boring or annoying. So Winry is a win, but let's talk about some of the other girls. Let's talk about Rita Hawkeye, because she's the only other female character I have something interesting to say about right now. Izumi Curtis is a good character, a total MILF, Lust was a great antagonist, and I guess a GILF, and Miss Armstrong seems to be everything I wish Hawkeye was. But let's get into her since she's disappointed me as of recently. Hawkeye was immediately one of my favorite characters. The stoic woman is usually one of my more favorite female anime and manga archetypes, just look at early Casca and Farnese, not to mention Revianetta. And Hawkeye was great, she was effective and worked well playing off of Mustang, who in himself is a great character. When she got characterized with Barry the Chopper, it was great. Especially when we saw her with her hair down, Jesus Christ. But then her character started disappointing me, and sort of betrayed the aesthetic I liked about her. Hawkeye's breakdown when Lust tells her Mustang is dead, and her backstory and devotion to Mustang because of her father makes her exactly what Winry isn't. She is the shonen love interest who has no reason to live or purpose in the narrative but to serve her love interest Roy Mustang, and this was monumentally disappointing. When she started crying and lost her will to live or whatever after Lust said that Mustang was dead, she fell apart for me. Not only have I seen this moment a million times before and hated it every other time I've seen it in a show or a series, but this is so painfully unrealistic. No one is this stoically devoted entirely to someone else, and it's such a generic trope. It's so paper thin. What makes this character tick? This other character. Is there anything else interesting about her? Apparently not. Their backstories are even intertwined, so she doesn't even get a cool one of those on her own. And this could all be remedied with one simple switch in the narrative. They just have to be a couple, and then everything works. Not only is it an interesting concept to have your working wife as your second-hand man and main protector, but it also makes both their motivations to each other more believable. But either they are saving the confession between the two of them for the end of the series like cowards, or they are never going to address it like cowards. And I don't want to hear that it was always implied from the start, because they at no point act like they are together and are far too formal with each other even when they are alone, for them to have a believable romantic relationship. But this transitions into another topic about this show, about relationships, and about how I characterize this show in general. Fullmetal Alchemist falls into the shonen trap of saving the relationship reveals for the end. It might not happen for Mustang and Hawkeye, but they are definitely saving the Edwin and Winry confession for the end, because that's when the generic hero's journey formula dictates it must happen. Wouldn't it be a million times more interesting if a shonen protagonist started out with a girlfriend and we had some Spider-Man-like side story about how his antics interfere with their romance? Or what if Winry and Ed had confessed at this moment when they grab each other's wrists? Instead, they both come to the conclusion that they love each other in their heads, leaving no room for a surprise, spontaneous moment of recognition between the two, that I think would be a million times more exciting. There are also other moments I know I identified as I was going through the series that would have been interesting moments to have the confession. I just can't remember them at this moment. But I'm sick of shonen teasing relationships for a whole series, maybe giving you a confession and then using a time skip to skip past the interesting part and showing them with kids 5 years later. It sucks, I hate it. But this concept about my frustrations with anime and manga romantic relationships will be channeled into another video later down the line. Let's talk about what I alluded to earlier about how this is an analogy for how I would characterize this series in general. I've come to the conclusion that Fullmetal Alchemist is the best a generic shonen can be. Now, a lot of people say this about My Hero Academia, how it gets all the traditional shonen tropes and does them better than they have ever been done. But I think this is Fullmetal Alchemist's appeal. Let's take the plot for example. I've never seen a long-running series this well planned out since Del Toro Quest. And that's only because that was a novel series before it was adapted, and novels tend to be more planned out because you aren't just drip-feeding information weekly or monthly, but giving a massive dump of information every year or so. It's remarkable how everything in Fullmetal Alchemist seems to come together perfectly. No time was wasted. Everything from the early chapters channel into what's going on currently, and I see no plot holes. That's remarkable. The cast also thrives because of this. Winry is a great example how she has constantly worked seamlessly back into the narrative and side recycled out when she isn't needed. The fact that the mine owner from like chapter 3 is still around and relevant today is great. The fact that the issues in the first 2 chapters were actually part of the villain's master plan is great. It rewards you for not forgetting, and you never have to play the retconning game with Fullmetal Alchemist and pull yourself out of the story. This is excellent, but the plot and characters all exist to me in this shonen bubble. I feel like the series is being held back by the restrictions it has because of its themes and because of its target audience. The series may get violent, but it's still largely a coming-of-age story for children. The constant exposition dumping that tires you out and makes you realize that the author treats you like a child who has to be spoon-fed information isn't the best feeling, especially when this is regarded by some people to be the greatest anime/manga to ever be produced. Characters constantly explaining the subtext of their characters is not fun either. I remember when there was nearly a whole chapter of Ed explaining his emotions one time, and anytime he and his brother have a fight, and it's supposed to be this moment of them coming back together, I just find it forced and corny, knowing that the brothers will never have a series-separating conflict. The relationship topic again can be breached here, as the Winry and Ed relationship would be more interesting if they could go further with it, but they can't, again because of the genre and the target audience, because it's a shonen. It's these childhood restraints that are inherent in shonen that hold the series down, and while I'm enjoying my time and I know this series is meant to impart a childish message to its audience, I ask myself why it is then heralded at the top of Mal as the best anime ever. I don't think Mal's user base is largely children. I like Fullmetal Alchemist for what it is, but for it to be one of my favorites, it's going to have to show me something more. And I can't wait to see if it does in the final stretch here. Thank you to all the $5 tier patrons. I hope you enjoyed your bonus video. I appreciate the support.